I've played a lot of PS5 horror games, and some scared me for the right reasons, others for the wrong ones. So I decided to rank them in a tier list from masterpieces to absolute trash, without holding anything back. Let's dive into my personal PS5 horror games tier list. Signalis grabbed me right away with its cold, haunting atmosphere. The fear isn't just from the creatures, it's from the empty halls, the flickering lights, and the feeling that something is always watching. As I moved through the abandoned facility, every note, file, and strange image pulled me deeper into its mystery. The game leans fully into classic survival horror, tight resources, smart puzzles, and real tension in every decision. Sure, a few puzzles run long and the inventory can be frustrating, but the mood, the storytelling, and the unforgettable visual style easily outweigh those issues. Signalis delivers dread with precision, and that's exactly why it earns its place in the masterpiece tier. Resident Evil 3 Remake felt like a solid follow-up to RE2 for me. The visuals are still incredible, and running through Raccoon City again, this time from Jill's perspective, gave me some great moments, especially when it connects back to RE2. The pacing is fast, and the whole game is over in about 5-6 hours, but honestly, that worked fine for me. Jill's sections bring back that classic survival horror tension, while Carlos's parts add a bit more action without going overboard. And of course, Nemesis keeps the pressure on the whole time. It's definitely not as strong or as memorable as the RE2 remake, but it still delivers a fun, polished horror experience. That's why I place it in the good tier. Dredge surprised me in the best way. I never thought a fishing game mixed with cosmic horror would hook me this hard, but exploring those quiet waters by day and surviving the nightmares at night was incredibly addictive. The simple fishing, the upgrades, the strange characters, everything kept pulling me deeper into its world. And when the fog hits and the panic meter starts rising, the whole vibe shifts from relaxing to genuinely tense. I loved how each zone had its own secrets, weird fish, and little stories to uncover. The grinding and linear upgrades can drag a bit, but the atmosphere, the mystery, and that slow slide into full-on Lovecraft horror make the whole experience unforgettable. For me, Dredge easily earns an excellent tier spot. The Outlast Trials gave me some of the funniest and strangest horror moments I've had with friends. Sneaking through dark rooms, hiding in lockers, and getting chased by killers with drills and puppets was chaotic in the best way. The game feels unique, and running these bizarre death games together kept us laughing and stressing at the same time. But after a few hours, I started to feel the repetition hit hard. There just aren't enough levels or variety to keep the excitement going for long, even though the upgrades and perks are fun to earn. Still, with solid performance, creepy environments, and great co-op moments, it's a good horror game to play with friends, just don't expect it to last forever. Madison had some great scares, but the experience kept getting dragged down for me. I like the Polaroid camera idea. Using the flash to reveal clues or light up a dark hallway is genuinely tense, and the puzzles can be clever. The atmosphere and sound design also kept me on edge, with whispers, creaks, and jump scares that actually worked. But the constant backtracking, tiny hidden items, and that annoying inventory limit ruined the flow. I got stuck way too often, not because a puzzle was smart, but because I missed some tiny object that randomly appeared later. By the end, the tension turned into frustration. Madison has its moments, but overall it lands in the mediocre tier for me. Resident Evil Village hooked me right away with its wild mix of action and horror. The opening attack in the village felt like a first-person version of Resident Evil 4. And from that moment on, the game kept surprising me with new enemies, new areas, and over-the-top villains. Exploring each domain from Dimitrescu's castle to the creepy dollhouse always felt exciting, and the variety of creatures kept the combat fun. The bosses aren't always the most strategic, and some sections lean more into action than horror, but the atmosphere, world design, and non-stop tension made the whole story really engaging. It's not as scary as RE7, but as an action-heavy survival horror game, Village lands firmly in the great tier for me. Little Nightmares 2 left me thinking long after the credits rolled. The world is creepy, sad, and strangely beautiful, and traveling through it with these two kids gave me moments that felt both emotional and disturbing. The game has some amazing visuals, unsettling enemies, and a soundtrack that really pulls you into the nightmare. The puzzles are fun and smart, even if the platforming can be a bit wonky and a few chase sections get frustrating. But overall, the atmosphere, the storytelling without words, and the haunting imagery make it a really memorable horror experience. It's not perfect, but it's powerful, and that's why it sits in the good tier for me. Alan Wake 2 completely pulled me in from the start. I loved switching between Saga's grounded detective work in Bright Falls and Alan's surreal nightmare world. Both sides felt unique, strange, and constantly surprising. The atmosphere is incredible, the visuals are stunning, and the mix of horror, puzzles, and full-motion video moments kept me hooked the whole way through. Combat feels tighter than the first game, and the way light is used to change environments or weaken enemies is still brilliant. Some upgrades feel unnecessary, and a few mechanics repeat, but none of that stopped me from getting blown away by the story, the style, and the sheer creativity. This game goes all out, and that's why it easily lands in the excellent tier for me. Callisto Protocol had the atmosphere and the visuals to be something great, but playing it was just painful. The camera is so close that half the time I couldn't even see what was hitting me, and fighting more than one enemy felt impossible instead of scary. The game tries to be brutal and intense, but it crosses into being frustrating, clunky, and unfair. I appreciate the horror and the presentation, but the actual gameplay dragged it down so hard that it lands in the trash tier for me. Tormented Souls instantly reminded me why I love classic survival horror. The fixed camera angles, the clunky weapons, the limited saves, it all brought back that old-school tension in the best way. Exploring that creepy hospital as Caroline, solving those weird puzzles, and trying not to die in the dark kept me hooked the whole time. Sure, the story's wild and the twist is obvious, but the atmosphere carries everything. Even with some rough visuals, especially on Switch, it still nails that feeling of dread and mystery. For me, this is one of the few modern games that truly captures the spirit of old Resident Evil, and that's why it sits in the great tier. Crow Country feels like a love letter to classic PS1 survival horror, and I enjoyed every second of it. Exploring that abandoned theme park as Maya took me straight back to the old Resident Evil days, fixed angles, tight spaces, and monsters that are weird, creepy, and wildly creative. The puzzles are smart, the key hunting loop is nostalgic, and the hint system is actually super helpful when you're stuck. Ammo is limited, so every encounter feels tense, and even though some late-game traps are a bit unfair, the overall atmosphere and design won me over completely. For me, Crow Country nails that retro survival horror vibe better than most modern attempts, which is why it's firmly in the excellent tier. Resident Evil 2 Remake is still one of the best horror experiences I've ever played. Walking through the Raccoon City police station with those updated graphics, tight controls, and insanely detailed zombies felt completely fresh, even though I knew the original. The atmosphere is unmatched. Every corridor is tense. Every item matters. And hearing Mr. X's footsteps getting closer still gives me chills. I loved how the remake keeps the classic survival horror feel, but modernizes everything in the right way, from the map updates to the sound design. Even if the second playthrough isn't as different as I hoped, that first run was unforgettable. I think this remake sets the standard for how classic games should be rebuilt, which is why it sits comfortably in the masterpiece tier. Visage is a game that really tries to follow in PT's footsteps, and at first it does feel creepy and unsettling. The house is detailed, the sound design is strong, and walking around in the dark with your sanity dropping can be genuinely tense. But the more I played, the more the problems started to pull me out. The inventory controls feel clunky, some sections are confusing for no good reason, and the chapters are uneven, with the third one being especially frustrating. There's definitely scary moments here, and the atmosphere works, but the game never fully comes together. For me, Visage had a lot of potential, but the rough edges hold it back, which is why I'm placing it in the mediocre tier. The Dead Space remake pulled me in right from the start, and honestly, it blew past my expectations. Walking through the Ishimura with the new visuals, lighting, and sound design felt completely fresh, even though I knew the original game well. The combat is still all about cutting off limbs, but now every shot shows layers of flesh and bone tearing away, which makes every encounter intense. I loved how the ship is more open and interconnected, letting me explore and backtrack for upgrades. The story also hits harder thanks to Isaac actually talking and the added side missions. This remake keeps everything that made Dead Space an excellent game and upgrades it in almost every area. The Evil Within put me through constant pressure, and honestly, that's why I loved it. The game is brutal, chaotic, and always pushing me into fights I barely survived. The creatures are disturbing, the levels feel twisted and claustrophobic, and the whole experience keeps you tense from start to finish. I liked upgrading my weapons and abilities with green gel, and every choice felt important because resources were always low. The story does get messy, and the main character barely reacts to anything, but the gameplay is so intense and creative that it still stands out. For me, The Evil Within earns a solid great because of how relentless, scary, and satisfying it is to overcome. Cronos: The New Dawn pulled me in with its dark sci-fi world right away. Walking through that ruined city, fighting mutants, and jumping between timelines gave the game a cool mystery that kept me invested. The atmosphere is heavy, and the areas look great, even if some sections drag on longer than they need to. The combat isn't as deep as games like Dead Space, but it still kept me tense, especially during those big boss fights where I barely made it out with a few bullets left. I liked experimenting with different essences too, even if some of them felt unclear. Overall, Cronos isn't perfect, but it gave me a strong, creepy adventure that easily deserves a great spot on my list. The Last of Us Part 2 hit me harder than I expected. It's one of the darkest games I've ever played, and there were moments where I genuinely didn't want to press the button the game was asking me to. The story pushes you into uncomfortable places, but that's also what makes it so powerful. The combat feels heavier, smoother, and way more flexible than the first game, and using stealth or planning fights felt great. The visuals, the acting, even the little details in the world all create a level of emotion you don't see often. The ending didn't land perfectly for me, but the journey was unforgettable. For me, it easily sits in the great tier. The Last of Us Part 1 is the version of this game I always imagined in my head. I've played the original more times than I can count, but seeing it rebuilt on PS5 honestly shocked me. The visuals, the facial animations, the lighting, everything looks so real that familiar moments hit way harder than before. Even the opening scene with Sarah felt completely different because of how much emotion they added. The AI is smarter, the sound design is sharper, and the haptics make every weapon and explosion feel more intense. It's not just a prettier upgrade, it feels like a brand new experience. For me, this remake easily lands in the excellent tier. Returnal surprised me in the best way. I went in not really knowing what to expect, and it instantly pulled me into this tense, atmospheric world. The mix of bullet hell action, exploration, and roguelike progression feels super smooth, and every run had me learning something new. The combat is fast, loud, and chaotic in the best way, dodging shots, swapping weapons, and trying to survive just one more room. The biomes look incredible too, from creepy ruins to massive alien deserts. It's tough, and dying sends you right back to the start. But that challenge is a big part of why it hooked me. So, Returnal is easily an excellent tier PS5 horror experience. Resident Evil 7 pulled me in right away with how scary and uncomfortable it feels. Exploring the Baker house in first person had my nerves on edge the whole time. Every creak, every dark hallway, every door felt like a threat. Jack Baker chasing me around the house was one of the most intense moments I've had in a horror game, and even when I had weapons, I never felt safe. The molded get a bit repetitive and the puzzles are simple, but the atmosphere, the mystery, and the return to classic survival horror made the whole experience unforgettable for me. This game reminded me why Resident Evil can be so powerful, and that's why I'm placing it firmly in the masterpiece tier. Playing Until Dawn felt like jumping straight into a cheesy horror movie in the best way possible. The characters are walking cliches, the cabin is creepy, and the game constantly messes with you using classic slasher tricks. And honestly, I had more fun laughing than screaming. The choices are the real highlight, though. Every small decision I made came back later, sometimes in ways that completely shocked me. The story gets messy in the second half and feels like it switches genres out of nowhere, but the tense moments, the great atmosphere, and the crazy consequences kept me hooked all the way through. It's not perfect, but it's a really enjoyable ride, and that's why I'm putting it in the good tier. Alien Isolation wastes no time pulling you into its terrifying world. The retro tech, the thick fog, and every tiny sound make the place feel straight out of the original Alien movie. When the xenomorph starts stalking you, the tension becomes real. I spent half the game crouching in shadows, hiding in lockers, and staring at the motion tracker like it was my lifeline. The opening hours are incredible, but the game stretches itself too long, and the repeated backtracking and sudden unfair deaths can get tiring. Even so, the atmosphere is unforgettable and the fear feels genuine, which is why Alien Isolation fits comfortably in the great tier. Silent Hill 2 Remake hit me harder than almost any horror game I've played. From the moment I stepped into that foggy town as James, I felt the weight of his guilt, fear, and confusion pressing down on me. The remake takes everything great about the original and turns it into something even more unsettling: the sound, the darkness, the radio crackling, the creatures lurking just outside my vision. The puzzles kept me thinking, the combat finally feels smooth, and the voice acting makes every moment more personal. It's bleak, emotional, and genuinely terrifying, and when it was over, the story stuck with me for days. That's why Silent Hill 2 Remake is an easy masterpiece for me. Playing the Quarry felt like watching a fun horror movie where I actually get to make the choices. The first time through, I was really into the cast, the slow build-up, and that classic stuck in the woods with something hunting you setup. Guiding 9 camp counselors and trying to keep them alive made every decision feel important, and the twists kept me guessing. But on repeat playthroughs, the game shows its flaws: long stretches where I'm barely playing, cutscenes I can't skip, and not much real exploration compared to Until Dawn. Still, that first run is a blast. The characters are likable, and the chaos is entertaining, which is why I put the Quarry in the good tier. The moment I started playing RE4 Remake, it felt like the classic RE4 I loved, but rebuilt into something sharper, faster, and far more intense. Every encounter pushed me to stay alert. Tight movement, brutal enemies, and those perfect aim, stagger, and melee moments never got old. The world is darker and more detailed, the pacing never slows down, and the combat feels so smooth that even simple fights became unforgettable. It kept surprising me with new twists, smarter enemies, and non-stop tension from start to finish. For me, this remake isn't just a modern update, it's the best version of one of the greatest survival horror games ever made, which is why it easily ranks as a masterpiece.